Pregnancy, right? If I were to wind the clock back hundreds of years, it wasn't necessarily treated as condition, right? Or disease per se. It's part of life, right? A couple hundred years ago, you'd go to the person in the village that knew how to deliver babies and they'd hopefully take care of that. Obviously, that is 70 to 75% of pregnancies. About 25% have some kind of complication. So the whole point of prenatal and postpartum care is to identify that 25% and that 75%. And it turns out in that 25%, there are all kinds of complications that come up.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I highlighted in the introduction, we're joined by a true visionary, Anish Sebastian, co-founder and CEO of Babyscripts, the leading virtual care platform reshaping maternal and postpartum care. Anish's journey is rooted in both analytics and empathy. With a background in health IT and consulting, he saw firsthand the limitations of traditional prenatal care and the untapped potential of data-driven, patient-centered innovation. In 2014, he co-founded Babyscripts to revolutionize pregnancy care through connected devices and digital workflows. His leadership earned him recognition as a healthcare transformer by the Startup Health Academy in New York. Under Anish's guidance, Babyscript has raised over $30 million in venture capital and angel funding, including a $6 million Series A1 led by partners such as Philips and Cigna. Today, the platform has expanded dramatically, supporting 300,000 pregnancies under management and published clinical results confirming its impact. One standout story, Deidre Winsey, a medical assistant from New Orleans, credits Babyscripts with saving her life through early detection of preeclampsia during her third pregnancy. Now partnered with over 70 health systems, Babyscripts is setting a new standard for accessible, equitable maternal care. Hey, Anish, are you ready to be our guru today?
Tom, I'm super excited to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share our story.
Oh, you bet. We're real excited to have you. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Yeah, so the story of myself and my family really also speaks to the story of Babyscripts, right? So, my wife is an OBGYN by training, so she is in the clinical world of delivering babies, and she later went on to subspecialize in fertility. But when I met her, she was a resident, and getting to know her meant I also got exposure into this whole world of pregnancy, prenatal, postpartum. Because when I started the company, I was a bachelor, to be honest, right? I wasn't really thinking about pregnancy as a major area to solve on. But and like I said, in getting to know her, it really got exposure into all of these major gaps in care, issues with access to care, and really got me energized and excited about taking technologies like smartphones, connected devices, and maybe solving and for some of these problems. After meeting her, and between that and now, we now have two babies together, right? So have somewhat closer exposure to it, and saw firsthand all of the challenges that some of the users that we serve see, right? Both on the provider side, but also on the patient side. And outside of that, I think I'm just trying to be my best self, right? As they say, right? So
yeah, I love it. How old are the kids?
The older one is 4, and the younger one is 2. So it's full on, all hands on deck.
Yeah, you got your hands full
here.
Yeah, for sure. So Anish, looking at the Babyscript stories, your team is tackling one of the most pressing challenges really in U.S. healthcare today. Maternal mortality and preterm birth. So you touched a little bit on it, but getting a little deeper, what really sparked your journey into this space? And what gap did you see that you wanted to address in those early days?
Yeah, just to expand on some of the statistics you brought up, right? In the United States, things like maternal mortality and morbidity is rising, right? It's actually the only advanced economy, right, where that's happening. Everywhere else, things are going down as it should, right? So we look at what's causing that, and then the CDC is also clear that most of these adverse events, or a significant portion of them, can be avoided. One of the things that we believe is a core root cause of this is lack of proper access to care, right? And we think that today in this modern technology-driven society and era, a lot of those access to care gaps can be solved for. So I think fundamentally what we saw back in 2014 when we started to get things off the ground was, how can we use a smartphone or a connected device or other basic technologies to, take off some of those barriers or increase access to care, right? So that's really what got us on our journey. And since then, we've continued to invest in the same underlying thesis, and that's been borne out to show some really good results. And we have a lot of customers now that we can bring this to, right? So really the heart of what Babyscripts is, trying to take away some of those access to care issues, but also making care more holistic, right? Not just focusing on one individual provider, but rather like a team of providers that can target individual risks as they come up, right? So
Yeah, I like that team approach, right? Because there's so much that goes into that. It's not just the physician influence, but you got nutrition. You've got all these other outside influences that are affecting what that outcome can be, right? So I think it's really pretty interesting that you're pulling that all together.
yeah, and back in the old days, there used to be this old adage: it takes a village to raise a child, right?
Hmm.
We also think that it kind of takes a village to bring a child to this world, right? And
Right.
and you hit on a lot of it, right? Maybe it's a lactation consultant in the postpartum time period. Maybe it's a nutritionist. Maybe it's a mental health advocate, or maybe it's just a good care navigator, right?
Hmm.
That's useful to maybe get you that pharmacy benefit or get you that resource that you didn't have access to, right? So obviously, we think the clinicians, your midwives, your MDs, your MFMs are central, but we think we can put a whole army of people, right? And in a virtual world, those connections can be made easier than in a physical world, right? So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was noting, with your role as the healthcare transformer at Startup Health, what a great honor that is. So I'm just kind of curious how that experience, influenced your vision for Babyscripts or impacted your approach to innovation in maternal health. Can you give us some insights there?
yeah, I think really what the work that we've done with Startup Health is is all about trying to collaborate with others as we're building this company, right? So, the Startup Health Academy served as an accelerator, an incubator of sorts for us in the early days, where we knew that this was a really difficult challenge we're taking on, and we really can't do this on our own, right? So, the team at Startup Health, and we've also joined other accelerators after that, right? Had and we're really grateful that they selected us, right? Had all kinds of resources, whether that be initial customers, whether that be investors, or just other experts that we could talk to across regulatory, product, customer experience, sales. And we think that really helped us sort of get going at the right path, right? As opposed to being lost in the forest in those early years, right? So.
Yeah, I would think that that kind of direction and, as you mentioned, collaboration can really, I would think, helps you get on the right path, but also I would think helps you, avoid some critical mistakes along the way too, right?
Yeah, that may be even the bigger part of it. Learn from some mistakes that other people that have been in the industry for a very long time have made. Right. So
Yeah, I love that. And then, looking at the company a little deeper, if I've got this right, you've got the Mommy Kit, right, which is an FDA cleared blood pressure cuff and scale, which is at the heart of Babyscripts virtual care delivery. Can you just walk us through from a practical standpoint how this integrates into clinical workflows and how this helps you and your team stand out?
yeah, so it really starts with when the patient goes into their practice or their provider, either at the identification of a pregnancy or right after that. And really, if that practice is working with us, that provider, that clinician, essentially will augment their care by enrolling that patient into Babyscripts. What does that mean? That that very day they get onboarded into our My Journey application, which is an iPhone Android app, and it's this GPS system for your pregnancy, right? It answers every question from how much coffee can I drink to what is the recommended pediatrician that my provider might recommend to what birthing class can I sign up for, right? It's like the one-stop shop. To us, it's kind of the replacement of the old "What to Expect When You're Expecting" book
Right.
that you would go to your local Barnes and Noble and buy, right? But in addition to that, it's also very custom to that practice, right? So it's made for that doctor-patient relationship. Then we layer on top of that our monitoring kits, right? So this is where we have our connected kits. A lot of our focus now is on blood pressure. We think that's a major driver of risk. So we have a Bluetooth, cellularly enabled, or in some cases just a traditional blood pressure cuff. The app will then notify the patient when to take their blood pressure, educate them on how to take their blood pressure, but more importantly, connect all that data back into the practice workflow. The thing that we've figured out, and we spent a lot of time on this, is to kind of figure out the algorithms or the protocols that is important for physicians to look at in an acute manner as opposed to just routine monitoring, right? So that allows for the practices to monitor these patients, but maybe not go through every single pressure every single day, right? Because that, as you can imagine, is pretty taxing, right? So for our moms, it's a great patient experience. They get this this box shipped to their home. They get to unpack it and really just get more empowered in their care. For our providers, it's great because it amplifies the care that they want to do and ultimately gives them more visibility into what's happening with the patients in a real-time basis, and then intervene. Just to close out on the whole program, right? We talked about it takes a village, right? So the app also has mechanisms by which you can screen for mental health issues or other risk factors. We actually did a partnership with Lyft, where if a patient had issues with transportation, right, like we can get them a Lyft car and they can go to the practice, the hospital, right? So this goes back to just the whole concept of recognition and response, right? Let's recognize a risk and then respond in the most appropriate way possible, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm listening to this, and it's obvious by my what I call my lighter blonde hair here. It's been a long time since I've had children, but I recall there's even in a healthy situation, there's always a lot of angst, right? And you think about hey, if you're in a rural environment or in a minimal access environment, right? I would think that would just provide a lot of comfort that you could get real time information and understand if something is really critical and important or just something that you need to deal with short term. Am I heading down the right track with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about sort of taking care out of the four walls of the practice or the clinic and into the patient's home, into the patient's pocket in some instances, right? And giving them the reassurance that they're on the right track. But if they're not on the right track, alerting them, but also their care team so they can take the appropriate action.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I noted, as I mentioned in the introduction, the story of Deidre Winsey, which is really inspiring, right? I mean, I never really understood how dangerous preeclampsia was, right, in a pregnancy. So, how do stories like hers reflect the life-saving potential of baby scripts in a real-world setting? Can you have us any more examples or indications?
Yeah, I mean, I think the story of Deirdre was an incredible one. I think it was eventually showcased in the New York Times in some of the work that they did. But the reality is, we hear those type of stories, sometimes on a weekly basis, right? Where a patient will reach out to us through a support mechanism, or we'll send out a survey. They'll respond by saying, "Hey, this was really meaningful for me," right? And I think ultimately we use these stories as little sort of drops of rain, if you want to call it that, right? To really capture the incredible value that of this kind of a program, right? And it's not just Babyscripts, by the way. It's Babyscripts, the patient, and the provider. It's that triangle, right? All working together. I think technology by itself is great, but may not be sufficient. It's that kind of sort of the collaborative sort of ecosphere that really makes it all work. We try and showcase a story a month, right? Both internally within the company, but also externally within our channels, ultimately educating providers, patients, payers, regulatory bodies, and hopefully eventually at a societal level that every mom matters and every life matters. And these little stories all add up, right? So yeah, and frankly, I'll also add, Tom, that healthcare is tough, right? There's lots of ups and downs, and when you have one of those down days, which, unfortunately happen more often than I like to share, these stories are the absolute kind of galvanizing force, right? I just like pick up one of these stories and read it, and I'm like, let's go. We can take it all on, right?
Yeah.
So that's been refreshing to me, but also to our teams, right? So
Yeah, I would think it would help give them that North Star, that mission and purpose, right?
for sure,
Yeah.
absolutely, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and to dive in this a little deeper, we just touched a little bit on underserved communities, but I'm wondering if you can help us get a little deeper into this in terms of how have you helped bridge that gap, and improve outcomes. I would think there'd be a lot of eliminating a lot of unnecessary urgent care visits, those types of things. Do you have any more information that you could share with us along those lines?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, people oftentimes think that remote care and virtual care is primarily something that benefits rural healthcare. That's certainly true. There's a tremendous amount of value in the rural setting, but there's also a lot of value in the urban setting, right? I'll give an example. A lot of folks in the urban setting have kind of shift work, right, where they're paid on the hour, and for in a typical, even low risk pregnancy, sometimes you're coming in 10, 11, 12, 14 times doing prenatal care, right? So if you live in a city like New York, you'd have to take, sometimes the whole day off of work, but certainly half a day off of work, right? You got to get on, a bus or a train to get to the practice, right? And if you have to park, my goodness, that's like super expensive, right? And then you have to sit in the office room. Typically, these clinics don't run on time, right? Because they're inundated with a lot of work, right? And then the appointment itself is 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? It's usually kind of a check-in, especially if everything's going okay. So, one of our first things that we did was this, we looked at routine obstetric care and said, can that be done at home, right? And the answer to that was yes. So patients actually don't even have to come in as much for routine care as long as they're compliant with this program, right? So that was great because patients loved it because when they come home after a long day's work, they could sit down, take their blood pressure, answer the questions in the app, and they're good to go. Providers liked it because it actually made their world a lot more efficient and streamlined, right? And we're making care a little more efficient and ultimately lowering the total cost of care because of the streamlining here, right? So that's just an example of how the technology can ultimately close the gap from an equity standpoint, right? Because it actually impacts the people that oftentimes have the most amount of challenges to get to care. You add on top of that all of the unnecessary urgent care visits, ER visits, particularly in the postpartum time period. It all adds up, right? But even in routine care, there's a lot of value there, right? So.
Yeah. I could probably geek out on that with you because I've got a background in health economics, and you look at what you're describing are really some of the hidden cost of healthcare delivery, right? Especially taking time off of work and parking, all those things you mentioned. Those really add up, especially in some urban communities like you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And the ones that, and you also have to think about the ones that actually end up not going because they can't afford to take that much time off work. They end up going to labor and delivery with an adverse event, right? Because of not getting adequate care, right? So it all, early and often in pregnancy is a pretty big important thing. So the quicker we can get them the right care, the better, right?
Yeah. So, going a little deeper into this too, Anish, when I was looking at your story, you've woven in services like postpartum depression screening and contraceptive counseling. So, I'm just kind of curious as to why this was so important for you to create this comprehensive maternal health platform rather than just kind of focusing on the obstetric piece. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, look, I think one thing to appreciate is that pregnancy, right? If I were to wind the clock back hundreds of years, right, it wasn't necessarily treated as a condition, right, or a disease per se. It's part of life, right? In fact, obstetric care is a rather recent modern phenomenon, right? A couple hundred years ago, you'd go to the person in the village that knew how to deliver babies, and they'd hopefully take care of that, right? Now, obviously, that is 70 to 75% of pregnancies. About 25% have some kind of complication. So the whole point of prenatal and postpartum care is to identify that 25% from that 75%, right? And it turns out in that 25%, there are all kinds of complications that come up, right? It's not all about the care of the fetus or the obstetric side of things, right? There is mental health, there is nutrition, there is, especially in the postpartum time period, right? Healing from a C-section, issues with postpartum depression, right? Issues with just overall recovery and getting back to life as normal, right? So there's a lot that goes on in pregnancy. And of course, if you have other conditions, let's just say you're diabetic and you get pregnant, or if you have hypertension and you get pregnant, right? Like these all sort of like kind of go together, right? So, I think it's the more kind of holistic care you can provide to the patient, the better off we are to find the best outcome.
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, it turns out if you offer truly holistic care, it also lowers the total cost of care, because turns out today your MD or your maternal fetal specialist ends up doing stuff that honestly is not the best use of their skill set and training, right? So think about, I'll give you an example. Making sure you're immunized in pregnancy is important, right? There's some navigation that you need there to make sure you go to the right pharmacy to get the right Tdap vaccine and yada yada yada, right? So should the MD be really doing that, or should there be a care coordinator or care navigator that can help with that, right? Or a care manager, right? So we think the latter, right? So I think if you build a whole sort of ecosystem and the circle of care concept, not only do you deliver better care, you also create economics that end up scaling here. Right?
Yeah, I would think that helps you get some buy-in, right? Because you're really kind of talking about helping those practitioners, whether they be a pharmacist, a nurse, or an MD, work at the top of their license, right? So if they're able to do that, that really kind of helps them focus where they really want to be focused, right?
Exactly, and we know there's a shortage, right, of the clinical specialists, right? So it actually helps with the overall national shortage as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. So Anish, a lot of our gurus out there are entrepreneurs or soon to be entrepreneurs. And we know that scaling in a healthcare system is really difficult right now. So I'm wondering if you can help us out, maybe teach us a few things in terms of what obstacles you faced when you were rolling out Babyscripts, across all these healthcare systems. And then how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. When I started the company, I oftentimes joke that I didn't have gray hair. And now, if you look closely, you do have to look closely. You might catch a couple. Um, look, there's a couple of sort of key takeaways that I would guide people on, right? So number one, it's a marathon, not a race, and this oftentimes can be challenging for very young entrepreneurs to grapple with. You might have the energy and the zeal to run, a million miles an hour. The reality of healthcare, particularly, change management in these large enterprise bureaucratic health systems, is that they are not going to do that, right? So sometimes having a patient, broader term outlook is super important. That's number one. Number two, I would say is, make sure you look at every single stakeholder in the equation, not just the person that decided to purchase your product, or the person that ultimately has the biggest sort of rank in the unit, right? It's up and down the food chain, which means the MA that rooms the patient, the front desk person that will put up the chart to say, "Hey, go download Babyscripts," or the OB clinician or the maternal fetal medicine doctor, down to the billing coordinator on the back end, right? So every stakeholder has a unique journey that they go through, and you have to make sure that the product is suited for all those, right? And then the other thing, I mean, there's several others, but the other thing I would say is the more integrated and aligned and automated things can be, the better off you are, right? So I think it's really important to make sure that, especially in these larger settings, you have thoughtful integrations, not just sort of this haphazard integration, right, into the clinical workflows, into the EMRs, but technical and non-technical integration. And you close the loop on it, right, to make sure like they see the data and the results coming out of it. So if you're able to do all of that, and look, I mean, this is still a learning process for us. I don't think we've figured out every little nook and cranny, right? But there are some best practices and patterns that we've memorialized and try and make part of our rollout. So.
I'm glad you mentioned workflows and especially with some of the non-clinical people, because oftentimes we see technology companies and it's oriented towards, one discipline like maybe nursing or MDs. But that workflow process, right? It's got to be easy for everybody along the way. And I bet you learned some lessons along the way with that, didn't you?
Yeah, I would say, workflow is probably the most important thing to nail in any change, especially in a large healthcare enterprise setting,
Yeah.
right? And that is down to like end to end, every little nook and cranny, right? Like who's touching it? How long are they touching it for? What is the impact of it on their day? How do you streamline that? How do you educate them on it? And then what if they end up leaving and someone else comes on? How do you train them on it, right? So there's just like so many nuances you have to sort of continue to think about. I think the one, I guess, silver lining in a lot of this is if you nail it and it's sort of ingrained, it does end up being a little bit sticky, right? So it ends up kind of having this benefit of being, pretty entrenched into a certain process, and changing that is going to be challenging. Right now, you have to go through like this huge ring of fire, right, to get there. But if you're there, one interesting fact that I learned that Epic, I don't think they've ever churned a customer in their entire history, right? So it goes to, if you nail the workflow and if you are a major part of the workflow, right, then you're going to be sticky, right? So
Yeah. That's really good. And to build on that, you mentioned you've got some pretty ambitious goals for the next few years. I think you mentioned your goal is to monitor 1 million pregnancies by 2030, which is coming at us quick. So, without giving away any trade secrets, but our gurus out there like to learn, I'm just kind of curious what strategies you might have put in place to accelerate towards those milestones.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to having really content, happy, satisfied end users, right? And for us, that's the patient that's using the product and going through that journey, and also the providers that are using and making sure it's meeting the workflow to our point, right? And then the payers, they get to see the benefit of it, right? So that sacred triangle, patient, provider, payer is foundational. I think once we have that and that's fully grounded, and a good thing there is like we have a lot of evidence now that we've captured, right? You can build on top of that, right? And one of the things we're starting to do more and more on is partner with companies in the ecosystem, partner with companies in the digital health space, right? We know we're not going to cover everything in the world of maternity and prenatal postpartum care, but there are other people that do specialized targeted things, right? So there might be folks that might be experts in postpartum recovery, right? We can partner with them. There might be folks that are experts in mental health, right? In pregnancy, we can partner with them, right? So, and then there might be people that do virtual care as a general sort of offering, but might not have a specialty in maternity. We can partner with them, right? So though we see these as channels to accelerate our efforts to commercialize and grow in the market, but also know our lane, right? That's the other thing. Be really good at it, know, and that just focusing on that, right? So.
Yeah, I love that, and I would think by partnering with some of these other companies that have other expertise that you can that leverage that and help create awareness for you, right? So it's kind of a two-way street. Am I heading down the right path with that?
Exactly. We think that rising tide is going to lift all boats here,
Hmm.
um, and ultimately make our patients and our users, they'll see the biggest value of it. So yeah, we want to evangelize them. Hopefully they evangelize us, and that gets us to have a really good, healthy partnership, right? So.
Yeah. So, Anish, I also mentioned in the introduction you've had a pretty impressive track record with raising some funds. So, again, to help our gurus out there, what best practices have you developed around funding and raising money that might assist our gurus?
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to finding the right capital partner, right? And also just knowing the kind of strategic value they're going to bring to the table, right? So I think the world of venture capital, private capital, growth equity, private equity, there's a lot of pockets of money out there. I think early on, it's easy to sort of follow the big names and the big money, if you want to call it that, right? I think while that certainly has a place and there's a lot of value in that, there's also a lot of strategic funds that we worked with, right? So one of the things we've done is, a lot of our customers have these like innovation funds, right? We've strategically worked with them, right? So some of our marquee investors are actually our customers, and we think there's a lot of value in that because they give us feedback on how to implement and scale up our product, and then we deliver value as a result of that. And if we're both successful, then they can participate on the uptick here, right, with Babyscripts, right? So that's kind of the hope. So we like strategic capital. We think that's a valuable mechanism. The other thing that's just as a fundraiser, it's a never-ending, constant process, and it's really important that you build trust with your funder, right? And that takes time, that takes patience, that takes a lot of honest conversations around the challenges that you're having and how you plan on, working around it, right? And ultimately, when they do write you a check and they come onto your cap table, they're looking for that kind of transparency and honesty, right? So I think that piece is super important. So we think we're onto something big here. We think that's something very meaningful, but we also think it's really important that any funder is also seeing that, right? So.
Yeah, I like that. I like that building trust and that openness, right? Because I would think that if you just kind of let them know where some of those challenges are, they probably have resources that can help plug in, right, to help you overcome some of those challenges, right? So that builds that trust but also helps solve the challenge, correct?
Yeah, and I think it's important to make sure that I always like to say, like, yourself and your funder should be in on a secret together type of thing, right? If their prescription for the problems we're trying to solve is very different than what you're working on, then that's not going to be great. Particularly if you take capital from them and then things don't go exactly as planned, right? So it's really important that when they look at your solution, that there has to be that moment where you go, that's it. Like, that was exactly how I would do it, right? And then once you have that, you can be open and honest with it and say, hey, these are the challenges that I'm running into. And then, you know what? Oh, I know another portfolio company that has solved this. Let me connect you. Or I know some recruiter that has a great talent, that can come help you, right? So I think that's when things really sort of kind of come into play. But it starts with that trust, but then also in on the right approach together, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. So one last thing for our gurus out there, right? Because you're in a really highly regulated end of the industry. So what's the one essential leadership lesson that you think you've learned that might help our gurus out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the point about regulation, that's a really good one, Tom, right? I think regulation can be both a blessing and a curse, right? A lot of people think of regulation as a headwind, right? But I think that if you really understand and appreciate that healthcare is a very regulated industry, it can also be a huge tailwind for you, right? So in our case, the maternal health policy sphere has been evolving over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and that has created a lot of opportunities that we've capitalized on, right? So I think that's the first thing on regulation that I would really kind of focus in on. But at the end of the day, to answer kind of like your broader question here, I think at the end of the day, I go back to what I said before, which is I think you just have to be like very patient in healthcare, right? Like, this isn't like a an AI startup that's going to have like 800 million users in 3 years, right? Like, that's just not in the cards, right? So you have to sort of navigate through some of these like murky waters, regulatory kind of bottlenecks, right, or opportunities, and then go to basic fundamentals, right? Like, make sure there's clinical value, the business model is clear, and you're solving an important problem, right? So I think if you do those, you're in good shape.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. So, Anish, this really seems like an exciting time for Babyscripts. What does the future hold for you and your team, and where are you going next?
Yeah, I think for us, the focus is on doing more and more within the world of pregnancy, particularly high risk pregnancy, right? So, there's tons of opportunities there, whether it's remote like fetal care or other types of like remote care. There's a ton of value there. I think, we're also doing more and more when it comes to not just technology, but also thoughtful kind of services that can go along with, technology, right? There, I see a lot of opportunity for AI. We've gone, a good chunk of this podcast without bringing up those words. So now is the time, and I think from my standpoint, the real opportunity with AI is to scale, augment, and amplify what clinicians and providers can do, right? So I think that's kind of where our focus is. I think eventually, obviously, AI will start delivering actual sort of like predictive care models and stuff like that, right? So we're excited about just doing more in the care delivery part of things, but also where appropriate, use AI thoughtfully to amplify and scale that up, right? So that's kind of exciting part of it. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Anish, first of all, I'd like to just acknowledge and thank you for the time that you took to be our guru today and all the great insights that you provided. If our listeners want to find out more about you or Babyscripts, how do we do that? Is there a website? Are you on LinkedIn? How do we learn more?
Yeah, babyscripts.com is our website. We're also on LinkedIn, X. That's where we also have some of our content. But I'm always looking to hear from folks in the community. So Anish at babyscripts.com. That's my email. People can hit me up. Or you can also follow me on LinkedIn, right? And then, I think, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about this really important topic. Every night when I put my kids to sleep and hang out with my wife, right? We sort of reflect on the privileges that we have as sort of experts in this field, right? And my goal is to make sure that you don't have to be an expert, or you don't need access to the best tools and technologies or the best type of insurance coverage, right? To have a baby, right? Like at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, just making babies, right? So,
Great family.
That's the mission and the goal here, right?
Yeah. Well, fantastic. So, Anish, once again, thank you so much. We appreciated all your insights in being our guru today.
John, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048 @gmail.com. And I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.